Hi everyone and welcome to GreenMonk TV. My guest on the show today is IBM's VP Energy and Environment, Rich Lechner. Rich, we've had a lot of interesting discussions here on GreenMonk, yourself and myself, over the past couple of months, and we noticed that there was a report came out of IBM on the 19th of August. It was specifically dealing with the electrical utilities. The title of the report was Global Electric Utilities, the Adaptation Challenge. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, this was done in conjunction with Acclimatize and with the Carbon Disclosure Project, and it really follows on to a report that was released in April of this year, which was called Building Business Resilience to the Inevitable Climate Change. And the point of it is that while there's been a lot of focus, properly so, on mitigation of and how to mitigate the impact of climate change, the reality is that even if we succeeded in stopping any further progression in global warming, we still would have to deal with the consequences of what has already occurred. And so this notion of adaptation is critically important. The report that was done in April of this year, again, together with Acclimatize, focused on the FTSE 350 and looked at their recognition of the impact of climate change and their preparations for dealing with that impact to their business. At that time, the report showed that while 87% of businesses in the FTSE 350 acknowledge that their business is at risk due to climate change, less than half, in fact less than a third, had any specific plans in place to address that risk. This report that was released on August 19th focused very specifically on utilities at 219 utilities from around the world who had filed with the Carbon Disclosure Project on a voluntary basis. Again, the interesting thing is that over 90% of them acknowledge that their business will be impacted by climate change. And yet, less than half had any reported any plans to manage that risk, manage or avoid that risk. And in fact, less than 30% had in fact documented plans for managing that risk. Equally interesting, perhaps, only 6% identified opportunities associated with climate change and plans to address those opportunities.
It's interesting to see, first of all, I guess, that the utilities are acknowledging that climate change is a reality and they'll have to address it. But beyond that, what kind of risks are they facing from climate change? Is it storm damage typically, or does it go well beyond that?
It goes beyond that. I mean, there are a number of issues. First of all, as you said, severe weather represents operational risks to their assets, right? So tornadoes, hurricanes, what have you, represent potential damage to their physical assets. Equally important, changes in climate, rising temperatures in the summer will represent significant incremental demand for things like air conditioning. In the winter, conversely, the potential for global warming and warmer temperatures on average in the winter months represent a drop in demand in some areas. So there's variability in demand. The impact on water in sort of lower water flow, less rainfall, less water in rivers represents a significant challenge or threat to those utilities that have hydropower. And then finally, the idea that there will be increasing demand for water as there's an increase in urbanization, which drives requirement for power in more concentrated areas, but also as populations rise and as water becomes more scarce, there's a natural contention here because water is required for power creation, and significant amount of power is required for the processing and distribution and reclamation of water. So water itself represents a significant part of this risk.
Interesting. And the Well, if we address the opportunities first, you say only 6% identified opportunities. Are the opportunities the likes of the deployment of renewables like wind and solar, or are there other opportunities that they identified?
No, you're exactly right. So increased penetration of renewables is one. Increased demand for electricity due to hotter summers will, in fact, allow them to, if they have the capacity to tap into that demand. The increased market for water efficient technologies and more efficient distribution technologies. So the utilities who become more efficient at distribution and at generation, particularly in hydro generation, will benefit from this.
Do the utilities, do they see at all the opportunities around the increased data collection that will come out of the implementation of smart grids?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that the report focuses on is the need for analytics. Again, whether both the report that just was issued as well as the one in April, we provide, together with Acclimatize, we came up with a list of 10 questions for directors to consider as they assess the potential impacts and opportunities associated with climate change. The need for deep analytics, whether you're talking about a distribution and manufacturing company looking at their the risk associated with their distribution network, for example, or their supply chain, or you're talking about a utility, the need for analytics is critical. And particularly in the case of utilities, tapping into the consumer behavior through things like smart meters is going to be crucial.
And how is the legislative landscape changing around this at the moment?
Well, that's a great question, because there are a number of existing legislation in place that require businesses to report on the risks and opportunities associated with their business, associated with climate change. So, for example, in the UK, the Climate Change Act of 2008 gave the government the authority to require electricity companies to assess and disclose the impacts of climate change on their business. In the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission or the SEC, has the authority to ask any publicly traded company to report the potential impact to their business of climate change. And then there are a number of regional agreements between legislative bodies and utilities, mostly on a voluntary basis. For example, here in New York City, where I am, there is an agreement between the New York City government and the local utilities for reporting on climate change impact to the utilities businesses.
Okay, I think we've come up against our time limit, Rich, but that's been really interesting. Any last comments about the report?
No, I think the importance of the report is that as the world sort of focuses on climate change, and as we come together later this year in Copenhagen to address the issues with that, there's been a lot of focus, as it should be, on mitigation. The value of this report is that it helps bring focus on the fact that adaptation is also required, not only within the utility industry, but as the report showed in April of this year, that all businesses need to focus on this. If your listeners are interested in a copy of the report, they can be found on ibm.com/green.